This is the prologue of The Last Cross. His chest heaved unbearably slow. Her lips trembled uncontrollably. "You'll be okay," she rasped gently. "I'm going to get help, and you're going to make a full recovery." Her words fell on deaf ears, as everything but his faint breath was left of him. "He's not here anymore, Lenora," a tired and light voice added regretfully. "We should get going before there's more casualties." The young woman named Lenora rubbed her cheeks with the back of her hand and stood, her head hanging aimlessly, avoiding her companion's gaze. "He's not a casualty. He was the love of my life," her voice shook, "and the father of my child." Her hands dropped to her abdomen, as if until that very moment she had been denying that simple fact. She rubbed her skin, her palms now under her shirt, the murmur of disbelief flooding the eerie silence. The older woman choked. "You have not only cursed yourself with this, but his good name as well." "Maybe so." Lenora's voice was quiet but stern. "This baby is the only family I'll have for the rest of my life." The old woman stepped next to her with a show of forced kindness. Lenora's sea-blue eyes shone in the dim starlight, and her chocolate-brown hair was in tangles from scalp to end. The woman guided her away from the mangled man who lay in front of them. "We need to get you home before the rest of them come back." Lenora shook her head in reply, and followed her mentor to the car they had arrived in. Her appearance had been the sole cause of her lover's demise that night, and the last memory she would have of him would be the sound of gurgled words beneath ruby blood. She ceased her careful steps before entering the vehicle and raced back over to his body. She lifted his plastered black mane away from his wound gently, while she sought the stained chain out. At the end, a gold medallion hung limply once she found it. She ripped it expertly with one swipe, then pressed it close to her heart. "Elias, why did you have to go?" she whimpered underneath tears. "I can't do this alone." The dawn was upon her now, the creamy pink light sweeping over his body. His flesh almost seemed its natural color, not the gray it had been before, as the blood drained from within him. She heard her name being called out, and stood again as she turned to leave him behind. Her voice was more confident now, her lips aching from sadness. "I will never forget everything you did for me, and I will make sure our child knows their father." The lone hope that somehow he had understood her vow made her feel calm. She plodded back over to the black car, her eyes slits of disappointment and rage. Her blood-stained shirt was draped over one shoulder, the other side ripped from the altercation beforehand. "Ready?" Lenora brushed greasy bangs from her forehead, and she slid into the back seat. She bowed her head forward, kissed the gold chain and the medallion, the taste of metallic filling her mouth. The smack of her lips made the woman driving look behind her a little. "Lenora, I asked if you were ready." Lenora smiled, her lips curved into a vengeful smirk. "Ready." Blood dripped from the corner of her mouth like a waterfall, nothing interrupting the steady flow. She coughed, choking on the taste. Her hands were crusty and stinging, as if someone had poured salt and ground them into the cuts. She seemed oddly still, almost like she had been expecting a different end than what she was suffering. She smiled, her red-stained teeth showing through dry, chapped lips. She stumbled clumsily from the wall that she had been leaning on. A soft, dry laugh reached her ears. "I told you, Lenora, coming here was a mistake. And I told you, Lucas," she gasped for a breath, "that I will never stop until you are dead." Lucas chuckled, his red hair covering his sweaty forehead, sticking to his dark-toned skin. "Such a fool." He took off the leather gloves his palms had been resting in. "I'm not going to let you live past this moment. If I do, you'll be scampering home to your mother and have the entire household after me. I can't be racing around. I'm simply not the running type." He caught up to her, his quick steps matching her pained ones. He grabbed her forearm and lifted it until her face was equal with his. His emerald pupils searched hers for fear, but faced nothing but a mutinous glare. His teeth grit together before he threw her against the wall. With a fierce stare, he watched her slide down the gray hallway until she sat seemingly upright, her eyes watching his every move. Her ivory skin was stained permanently red now, the blood still running from her lips. She tried to lift herself up, but found her legs to be useless against the torture she had endured. You will never win, Lucas. You may control half this city, and you may have killed Elias, but you will never. I didn't kill him, you did. She quivered at the thought of Elias still lying in the street, dead from things beyond her control. She secured his hands, entwined with the other on her lap, watching Lucas fiercely pacing in front of her. Doing that is a waste of time. Kill me already, she pleaded. I came here to die. Lucas stopped. He lowered himself down to the floor on his knees, his eyes filled with questions. He leaned in and touched her lips with his. She breathed sharply now, her lungs battling defeat. He pressed them harder and found she returned his advance. As soon as the kiss had started, it was already over. Lenore's brown hair that she had tied back fell across her shoulders now almost as rapidly as her body emptied of her blood. Lucas backed away, leaving her to her death. He had never had intentions of killing someone who was already dying. I will leave you, and when I return, I will see to it that you are buried respectfully. Lucas, you've forgotten about one small detail, she invited him back, one that will determine the outcome of your life and your households. Lucas turned on his heel and stared at the fading beauty on the grossly tiled floor. And what's that, Lenora? He wondered aloud. She turned to him now, her face brimming with satisfaction. Elias and I, she began, we have a son. Okay. Lenore's dead. The woman heard a stern voice whisper behind her. The gray strands framing her face were brushed back by a withered, wrinkly palm. I thought as such. She's never missed holding Ramsay before his bedtime. Her head hung low, barely supported by her fragile shoulders. We'll need to get a patrol together for this child. Lucas will be after him. How do you know? The man who had delivered the news of Lenore's death asked. I don't mean to question you, but how can you be so certain that he's after a child? That scared me. Hi, Chubbs. The woman smiled at the baby, her eyes focused on his moving hands, his tiny fingers pressing on her single thumb. She let go and turned to face him. He was taller than her head only reaching his chest. She felt unease in his face, the same unease she felt in her heart. Her throat was closing, she felt, at the thought of her grandchild being murdered as his parents were. If even a small percentage of my son is in this child, Lucas will be threatened. Elias Cross ruined his livelihood for a time, and this child will do no different when he grows older. The man nodded and walked towards the door, leaving the woman to tuck in her grandson peacefully. He felt a little despair pulsating, as frequent as her heartbeat. Amelia, I'm so sorry for your loss. He closed the door behind him and walked calmly down the marble hallway. His eyes cut to every little sound coming from the open doorways. He wasn't going to take any chances with Lucas Mildredge. He was bad news and had done nothing but kill his fellow colleagues for decades. In all fairness, he had done the same thing to them. He walked into a lit living room and saw 3 men and a woman sitting in the various chairs and couches. As you all know, Lenora is dead. His voice echoed in their minds. The first, a blond man, taller than the speakers, stood to face him. Sorry. Lucas, he asked grimly. The gloom that was sitting above them in the room was hard to ignore. I should have stopped her. The first older man gazed at him. No, Jax, it wasn't your fault. Even with the child in his bed asleep, she took on the whole of his operation by herself. I just don't understand why she'd risk it, he replied with resentment coating his words. The woman, her black hair tied in a bun on the top of her head, stood now, her brown eyes glowing with pain. I know she loved Elias, a sandy brunette man sitting on the couch beside her widened his eyes, obviously the one she loved, but I can't forgive her for being so stupid. He lowered his eyes this time, afraid she might feel the same for him. The older man grinned. The best thing we can do for her is finish the mission she laid out for us. The others nodded in agreement. So how do we pick up where she left off? Apparently. We're not going to read in peace. The last man. So how do we pick up where she left off? The last man with ebony hair asked, inquisitively. The older man dropped a gold medallion onto the coffee table near them. It's chained thin and feminine. We visit Lucas. Okay, stay tuned for part 2.